Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rafe Courage. I'm the British Consul General based in Düsseldorf, and I am currently the Country Director for the Department of International Trade in Germany. I'm really delighted to open this event today. It's a welcome opportunity to bring together the British government, German colleagues, and German businesses to provide information on trading between our two countries. The last 5 years since the Brexit referendum in Britain have, to be honest, felt quite long, and in terms of political integration have obviously made clear that Britain has some differences and we are pursuing a different path. We're now 10 months since we reached agreement on the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement, or TCA. So how far have we come? Well, as you know, we now have a deal which signals a new chapter in our bilateral relationship, and it has allowed government, businesses and people to look to the future. This is a deal which is grounded in the principles of free trade and strong cooperation. For the hundreds of thousands of people working for thousands of companies between the UK and Germany, this is good news, particularly in the sectors most important for our bilateral relationship, such as chemicals, pharma and automotive, and I'm sure many of you on the line will be from these industries today. Trade between us matters. It matters for businesses, investors and workers on both sides of the English Channel. Total bilateral trade volume in 2020 reached 108 billion British pounds. Exports to the UK support over 800,000 jobs in Germany, and UK exports to Germany support almost 500,000 British jobs. Of course, 2021 has been challenging for many reasons. COVID-19, supply chain disruption, component shortages, and general consumer uncertainty. Trade between the UK and Germany will take some time to find a new rhythm, particularly as we recover from the pandemic and look towards a sustained economic recovery. But I should stress that this is not unexpected. Precedent tells us that even without the impact of these multilateral issues, it can take some years before we see the full effects and benefits of a free trade agreement. And we're still seeing many great examples of companies working together between Germany and the UK to greater success, and that's what our team for the Department for International Trade in Germany are here to do. We must continue providing a platform to enable this kind of cooperation as we look towards some of the global challenges and opportunities that we all share: climate change, supply chain issues, and so on. We are doing all that we can to support businesses to continue trading between the UK and Germany and to find flexible and pragmatic solutions to issues when they arise. Our border control measurements are being introduced in 3 stages over the coming months to ensure businesses have the time that they need to prepare. Working with our German counterparts is crucial to this, which is why I'm absolutely delighted that the German customs authorities, I think the Generaldirektion Zoll, are able to be with us here today. And we've also worked with many regional chambers of commerce, IHKs, to ensure that this content is as useful and relevant as it can be to those of you who are joining us today. I really hope you find this a useful session, and please do contact us either in the chat or after the event. My team and I are here to help businesses and to help the British-German trading relationship prosper. And now I think I am handing over to Margaret Whitby. I wish you all a very productive session. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Rafe, and indeed you are. Good morning, everybody. My name is Margaret Whitby, and I work in the UK's Border and Protocol Delivery Group. We're a government department that sits in the Cabinet Office in the UK, and we have the privileged position of working with all of our UK government colleagues and indeed many of you across Europe as well. We thank you for joining us this morning, and I think on the next slide, please, we have just a few ground rules. As you will appreciate you're in a Teams live event. You can ask questions in the Q&A section, and please do ask us questions. As Rafe said, we are here to help you. We have representatives from the German Customs Authority and from the UK Customs Authorities this morning, and of course from our colleagues from other government departments to cover food and drink and the UKCA changes. But please do ask the questions, and we will do our very best to answer them in the question and answer session later. We will be recording this webinar. We are recording this webinar, and a recording of it will be available on gov.uk. We will send a copy of the slides used to all of you who've joined us, because some of them are quite technical. We will gather all of your questions, and we will be producing a frequently asked questions document and publishing that too. The next slide, please. There's a brief outline of our agenda. We're first delighted to say that we'll have a presentation from Melanie from the ZOLD on General Customs Procedures. Then we'll go into UK Customs Procedures. Anastasia will present for us on moving food and drink. And my colleague John Winterbourne will talk about the border facilities, particularly in Kent, in the southeast of the UK. Charlotte Dicken is going to tell us about the UKCA markings. We've pulled together a few case studies for you. They're quite complex. We will go through them given time, but we will share them, the slides, with you, so you can go through them at your leisure. And then we'll finish up with a question and answer session that will cover, I hope, a number of the questions that you put in our live Q&A. The next slide, please. Of course, we would like something from you. We would like you to tell us about your experience on moving goods between the EU and GB since the 1st of January. If you could use your smartphones or whatever you've got handy to go into Slido. There's a QR code there as well that should get you straight into our first question. We only have 3 questions for you, the last one towards the end of the event will ask for your feedback on the event itself, but we'd be very grateful if you could take the time to go in and complete our Slido poll. And the first question, as you can see there, asks you about your experience on moving goods between the EU and GB since the 1st of January 2021. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. Right, I am delighted now to hand over to the German Customs Authority, Suzal. Thank you. And I'm afraid we have some time. They're joining us by phone, but they'll be able to see the slides. So do bear with us if we have any technical difficulties. Thank you very much. And I think I am handing over to Melanie. Is that right, Melanie?
So good morning. Yes, I think this is right. Thank you. Yes, and you can hear me. That's great. So my name is Melanie Schmaljohann. Within the Customs Authorities, I'm based in Hamburg, and I'm head of unit for the import process. And I'm also charged with the operational questions concerning the Brexit. So I'm very honored of having the possibility to talk to you today. And I would like to give you a large overview on the Brexit, and I would like to ask on some questions that have been given to us before this meeting today. Before starting, I would like to say, yes, I'm joined by phone. I can't see the slides on live because we have big technical problems today. The internet, we have no access to internet today. And so I'm looking on the slides here offline on my computer. And so unfortunately, I can't see any questions either. So we have to handle blind audition today, but I'm convinced that this piece of German-British cooperation will work out very good. So I hope we can get through this technically, and normally you should see the slides, and I will try to follow offline. So it's a bit challenging today. So next slide, please. Before starting to the legal context, as I mentioned before, I would like to give a large overview and to state some general points of view on the topic of the Brexit, how we managed. Next slide, please. So I think the changing of the year 2020 to 2021 was very challenging for all of us. It was only by the end of the year that we really knew what was changing in the legal systems, the new rules of origin. So we knew Brexit would come, but the technical rules we just had in the last week of December, so it was quite a hot end of the year. Let me state it like this. So in the first weeks, we had moderately, the volume of goods increased moderately. So the year started soft in importation and exportation, and that was quite good because where the big changement, it was mainly the parcel and courier services who really had a big increase of volume of goods. And by the beginning of the year, some suppliers had significant problems with the quality of data transmitted from the UK and subsequently with the proper customs declaration. So this caused big backlogs, and I think many of you were concerned about this and noticed those backlogs. So even if the routes were clear, we had really this big problem with the quality of data. Next slide, please. So to solve those problems, we had many discussions with associations and companies, and by these discussions, we found good solutions for the frictionless handling of goods. It took us several weeks, but I think now we are on a very good way in a very strong cooperation with companies and associations. The volume of clearance has increased by about 28% in imports, and the share of consignments from the UK is about 30%. So for us, the numbers of goods between UK and Germany is really big, and it's a very important number. Next slide, please. If we look on how those goods arrive in Germany, looking on the import process, we state that we focus on a few customs offices. So the big airports are very concerned, but also as we have rural transports from the UK, we have also smaller inland customs offices that are really concerned by the Brexit. If we look on export, it's we have no particular customs offices that have bigger amounts than others. Looking today on our processes, we can state that we handle significant amounts day by day, but we don't have delays by now. So the first weeks have really been hard, I think, for everybody, but 10 months after Brexit, we can state today that we handle the amounts, and that on the point of view of the operation side, it's all well for us. Next slide, please. So before I focusing now on legal rules and import and export formalities, I would like to state that in general, we have no particular rules in import, export, or transit after Brexit. The UCC didn't change, and the general rules we had for third country importations and exportations stayed the same. Of course, we have new rules on privileged origins, but generally, we have no exceptions on the basic rules of customs. So the point that I might state now, the legal basis stayed the same before and after Brexit. So first of all, I would like to focus on the ORI number and the point of residence in the customs territory of the Union. Next slide, please. So the general rule, we have that anybody who would like to establish, who would like to declare something at customs authorities in Germany, has to be located within the territory of the EU. So economic operators that are not established in the customs territory of the Union have to apply for an EORI number in certain cases. This EORI number is our registration number to recognize an economic operator. Legal basis is laid down in Article 9 UCC and in conjunction with Article 5 UCCDA. This applies in particular where a customs declaration is to be lodged in the customs territory of the Union. So what we are talking about now is an exception under strict circumstances. I'm focusing on now. Next slide, please. So economic operators that are not established in the customs territory of the Union may apply for an EORI number in Germany if a customs declaration is to be lodged at a German customs office for the first time. Legal basis is Article 9 UCC. So you might not apply for an EORI number just in case that at any time you might have to do a customs declaration. There's really to be a relationship of applying to this EORI number, and then you have to do a customs declaration. If you need further information on how applying for this number, you might find this on our website that is cited here on the slide. Next slide, please. The EORI number is valid throughout the customs territory of the Union on the basis on Article 7 UCCIA. That means that for any operations within the customs territory of the Union, you need one EORI number, and if you have an EORI number of one member state, you are not allowed to apply for another EORI number in another member state. The economic operators not established in the customs territory of the Union may lodge a customs declaration under the conditions laid down in Article 170 UCC. That's what I mentioned already. Is we are now talking about a real exception under very strict circumstances and conditions. Next slide, please. So to this end, to this exception, it must be fulfilled that customs declarations are made only occasionally and that the customs authorities consider this to be justified. So this necessity of occasionally is fulfilled when a person declares goods under custom procedure less than 10 times a year. The fabulous rule of 9. So if one applies more than 9 times per year, we do not accept this exception of declaration by a person not situated in the customs territory of the European Union. Next slide, please. Justified is the use of this exception if post-clearance checks at the declarant's end do not appear to be necessary in relation to the particular consignment of goods. So for us, this is a real strict and very important point for the exception, because normally we accept declarations only by economic operators based on the territory, because we have many clearance post-clearance checks as we try to keep the flow of goods through borders very fluent and not to stop the goods. We have many post-clearance checks. So this justification that we don't need to check anything afterwards is for us a very important point, as for an economic operator who is not situated within the territory, we have no possibility to make post-clearance checks. So this is quite important condition for us. And so if for the above reasons a customs declaration cannot be lodged in the UK company's own name, an indirect representation should be considered. So this indirect representation for us is the normal case, and the circumstances that I tried to explain above are for us really the exceptions under very strict circumstances. Next slide, please. Residence in the customs territory of the Union may also be based on the fact that the company has a permanent establishment within the meaning of Article 5 UCC. In this case, the residence is then stored in the EORI master data after verification. So it is not necessary that the main seat of the company is within the union, within the territory of the European Union. But yes, conditions you may find in Article 5. So that might be a solution for companies to declare in their own name if they want to import or export goods to the European Union. So this was a very brief and short overview on the necessity of EORI numbers, or on the possibilities to apply for an EORI number for a company that is not based within the territory of the European Customs Union. But as I mentioned before, this rule has not changed with the Brexit. It's the same rule we already had within the European Union before. Next slide, please. So if we now turn to the new rules we have within the European Union since 1st of July of this year, there's a big change with the IOS, so the Import One-Stop Shop. I'd like to point out some points of view on this. Next slide, please. So what we have to state that the IOS is implemented for distant sales of goods in consignments with a material value up to 150 euro. So this for those operations, we don't have to have a subject on excise duties. The system has been established as the changement that we now apply for VAT even below the shop of 150 euros, which is a strict tax regime. It's not a customs regime. It's concerned about taxes, about the VAT. The VAT is calculated at the time of sale. And for customs declaration by union's resident, the declarant has to give the identification number of IOS. So the economic operator has to apply for this number before and then give this number at the time of the customs declaration. And this number is valid for every member state. And what is very special for us for customs is on the next slide. Yeah, maybe turn to the next slide, please. That customs authorities, by the importation of the goods, only validate the number. We don't validate the rules behind. We don't validate if the number is used at the right purpose. We don't look if this number was given to the right person. We only validate the number itself if it's validated, and then the customs procedure is fulfilled. And everything that follows up on the regime on IOS is not concerned by customs authorities. It's the tax authorities that are competent for IOS. So if we have a VAT return or if there's any problem with the taxation, we do not give a refund by customs authorities. The complete follow-up is managed by the tax authorities. So for Germany, this means, next slide please, that in case of any informational problems, please get your information at the Federal Central Tax Office. We mentioned the homepage on this slide. So for us, for Customs Office, it's just the question when we apply the IOS that we validate the number given at the customs declaration, and everything that follows up is really is handled by the tax authorities. So unfortunately, I can't go further on this point because we are not really deep into this process. So then has been the question given to us concerning import procedures, and now I would like to state a few points on the export formalities, and I think export formalities in the context of the Brexit. So next slide, please. And then the next slide, please. I was talking too fast. So if we look upon the pure legal rules, union goods exported from the EU 27 to the UK since 1st of January 2021 shall be placed under the export procedure with presentation of the goods and lodging of an export declaration. This is the general rule that was already applicable before the 1st of January of this year. For non-union goods moved from the EU 27 to the UK since 1st of January 2021, a re-export declaration on exit summary declaration or re-export notification shall be lodged. So this is something special, of course, that by the 1st of January of 2021, we had goods changing their status from EU goods to non-union goods, but they are placed under the general regime of rules we had already before. Next slide, please. Express consignment of goods not exceeding 1,000 euros for commercial purposes can be declared directly to the Customs Office of Exit, accompanied by a manifest. So, for example, the Customs Office or transit procedures open, so there we have a one-step procedure. If the customs authority accepts the manifest, the goods shall be deemed to have been declared for export by presentation. No further export formalities, in particular at the border, are required. So this is this one-step rule I laid down in Article 140 and Article 141 of the UCCDA. Next slide, please. If we look on export consignments not exceeding 3,000 euros, they may be presented directly to the Customs Office responsible at the point of exit from the customs territory of the Union and can be declared electronically, for example, in Antwerp. This is laid down in Article 221 UCCIA. Next slide, please. If we have export consignments above 3,000 euros or consignments below this value but that are faced to restrictions, they shall be presented to the Customs Office of Export and declared electronically. For example, might point out a note. So here we have a two-step procedure. After being placed under the export procedure, the goods must be presented again at the Customs Office of Exit. For example, in Antwerp, the Customs Office of Exit shall monitor the physical exit of the goods and send the certification of exit to the Customs Office of Export. The Customs Office of Export then discharges the export operation and sends the certification of exit to the declarant, which is also considered as a proof of export for VAT purposes in Germany. And I think here we are at the point where we face a lot of problems after Brexit. I'll state on this later on. Next slide, please. Special features apply to Northern Ireland, as we have a special regime with Northern Ireland. So Northern Ireland is part of the customs territory of the UK, but is treated as if it were part of the customs territory of the EU 27. So this is quite particular, and sometimes I think in everyday handling it's a bit tricky. So all goods entering Northern Ireland from the EU 27 do not require export formalities. If the goods are not intended for Northern Ireland, for example UK, the goods must be presented in Northern Ireland and placed under the export procedure by the Irish customs authorities. So this is quite special, and I think the rule is clear, but the handling in everyday operations might be a little bit tricky. Next slide, please. For all goods which are to be brought from Great Britain to the customs territory of the EU 27 and transit through the customs territory of the EU 27, an exit summary declaration is required. This is laid down in Article 271 UCC. So this was an overview just on the legal rules we have in export processes. Next slide, please. So what we stated for the part of German customs officers since the Brexit, the German Customs Administration also notes that for exports to the UK via the French smart border system via Calais, in many cases the exit is not confirmed, and we know that this caused big problems to companies as just this proof of exit was missing. So we read into a lot of follow-up procedures by the means of alternative proofs, and this is a great deal of work both for industry and customs. So the normal way that the customs authorities in France just confirm the exit, as this didn't work by the beginning of the year. We had to change to alternative proofs, and yeah, this causes a lot of work on both sides, I think. And the German Customs Administration is in contact with the other member states on this issue, and discussions are also ongoing at EU level to solve the problems. So we try to solve the problems. We are in discussions, and I might state that we are on a good way, but I think we didn't reach the end of the questions by now. Unfortunately, I can't give further information on this right now because we are still within the process of discussions and trying to solve the problem. And so from my part, next slide, please. This was a brief overview on the questions that have been addressed to us beforehand. And I thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you were able to follow the slides. Thank you very much.
Melanie, thank you. That worked well, I think, from my point of view, from what I could see. I think we kept up with you, and we are gathering a number of questions in the Q&A, and I know my colleague Natasha has emailed you some of those, so we will pick them up later. Having said that, you covered some of them in your presentation. For instance, we were beginning to see a number of questions about the clearing of exports at the French border, and you've just picked that up, but we'll come back to you at the question and answer session. So thank you very much for that very useful presentation. On the next, thank you. On the next slide, we've got a brief summary of what my colleagues across government are going to tell you. I'm working on the basis that we are going to tell you what we're going to tell you, then we'll tell you, and then we'll summarise it all in case studies at the end. But there are some key dates about importing goods into GB from the EU. Many of you will be familiar that on the 1st of October, the waiver for EXS ended for many goods, and our colleagues from HMRC will be able to talk you through more detail on that if you've got some questions. And ID cards are no longer acceptable for entry into GB. We have worked hard to try and get that message out, particularly to hauliers across the EU, but would welcome your help and support through your supply chains to make it clear to everybody that anybody entering GB now will not be able to do so purely with an ID card. They will need a passport. The dates to watch now are the 1st of January. The import controls come into force for customs procedures. Declarations will need to be made. Of course, people can continue to use simplified procedures such as CFSP if they're authorised to do so, but declarations will be required. And for moving food and drink products in, pre-notification will be required on the IPAF system. Our colleagues will talk you through the detail of that. In July, from the 1st of July 2022, entry summary declarations will be required when moving goods into GB. Export health certificates will be required for products of animal origin and animal byproducts. Phytosanitary certificates will be required for regulated plants and plant products, and pre-notification of all products of animal origin will be required. Goods will need to enter via a BCP to undergo documentary or physical checks. So that's just a brief summary, a handy slide of the dates to watch for imports to GB. But I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Lindsay from Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs to talk us through customs procedures. Lindsay, are you with us and are you ready? Oh, sorry, before we get there, apologies, Lindsay. We have another question on our Slido. I do apologise. We want to understand your readiness for GB import control. So for those of you who've logged into Slido and those of you who haven't, you can still do so and answer question 2, please. Which of the following statements best applies to you? Do you know the procedures for moving goods between the EU and GB? You know some of them, but not all of them. And do you know what procedures will be required between, or do you not know any of the procedures? But hopefully after the event today, you will be all able to answer A, but we'd like to understand where you are now. Thank you. Lindsay, I do apologise. Over to you for a run through customs. Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret, and good morning, everyone. As Margaret said, my name's Lindsay Neal and I'm representing Customs Stakeholder Engagement in HM Revenue and Customs. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you all today, and this morning I will be walking you through a number of key customs topics that we do hope will be helpful. If we could have the next slide, please. So first, a very quick reminder of the current position. So from the 1st of January 2021, importers and exporters must complete UK and EU customs declarations, and throughout 2021 importers of non-controlled goods have the option of making a simplified declaration in their own electronic records, and they have up to 175 days to submit the information to HMRC on a supplementary declaration, often called delayed declarations. It's very important to note that a new timetable was recently set out from UK government, and some of the critical dates are on this slide that you're seeing now. Full customs declarations and controls will be introduced on the 1st of January 2022 as previously announced. The waiver for Export Safety and Security Declarations, or EXS, ended from the 30th of September 2021 and is now business as usual. But safety and security declarations for imports into GB will not be required until the 1st of July 2022. We would recommend always consulting gov.uk, which is updated regularly. And if I could have the next slide, please. So let's look at this in a little more detail. For goods entering into GB from the EU, there is currently a waiver on the need for an entry summary declaration, but from the 1st of July 2022, a full ENS will be needed at consignment level, and the carriers are responsible for making sure that this is submitted. They, or an agreed third party, need to lodge the declaration before the goods arrive into GB. Of course, there is a requirement that these declarations should be completed properly, and if there are mistakes, they can be amended prior to the time of arrival. And if I could have the next slide, please, I'll cover a few more details on that. There is some helpful information on this slide that explains some key information to help complete the declaration fully and accurately, and how to go about submitting it to HMRC. A GB YORI number is required, as well as some information on the goods themselves and the movement. You'll also need a government gateway user ID to access the SNS GB service online at gov.uk. Again, there is lots of helpful information that further walks you through this service at the gov.uk website. And if I could have the next slide, please. That was entry summary declarations. Let's now look at exit summary declarations for goods moving from GB into the EU. This process is in place now as the waiver for movements of empty pallets, containers, and modes of transport being moved under a transport contract, and on all roll-on, roll-off movements of goods ceased on the 30th of September 2021. The legal responsibility for making sure the EXS is submitted once again does sit with the carrier or an agreed third party that must have the carrier's consent. However, please note that it is a different system for these declarations. This is done via HMRC's chief system, and you can find out more information on when an EXS is required and how to submit the declaration itself at gov.uk. And if I could have the next slide, please. Looking now at the two models for customs control, border locations receiving goods into GB from the EU will need to choose to operate one of two different models for customs control from the 1st of January 2022. There is the temporary storage model, which allows goods to be stored for up to 90 days at an HMRC-approved temporary storage facility before a declaration is made and government officials can carry out any checks before goods are released from that facility. The other model is the pre-lodgement model, which ensures that all declarations are pre-lodged before they board on the EU side. And this will maintain flow, especially at high volume RoRo locations. We would recommend that stakeholders check with border locations which model they'll be operating in January. And there's also a list of ports using GVMS noted on gov.uk. If I could have the next slide, please. As I mentioned, one of these models is the temporary storage model. And in this model, goods imported into GB from the EU can be stored on a temporary Apologies, just having some technical difficulties at my side. Goods imported into GB from the EU can be stored on a temporary basis under customs control before they're either released to free circulation, exported, placed under the outward processing procedure, or placed under a special procedure, for example, such as customs warehousing. From January 2022, all temporary storage facilities need to have an inventory system, and you can find more information at the temporary storage page at gov.uk. Border locations using this customs control model can use GVMS to help facilitate the control of pre-lodged declarations for driver-accompanied RoRo goods and complete the Office of Transit function. And if I can have the next slide, please. I've mentioned GVMS, and now I'd like to talk about that in a little bit more detail with you, along with the new control model, the pre-lodgement model. GVMS is the Goods Vehicle Movement Service, and it's been brought in to support pre-lodgement locations from the 1st of January 2022. However, it will also be used, as I've mentioned, for when temporary storage locations to facilitate control of pre-lodged driver accompanied RoRo and when the Office of Transit functions are needed. Although it's already live for goods moving into GB under transit, it will be used for both imports and exports from the 1st of January 2022. This system will pull a lot of information together. For example, it will allow declarations references to be linked so that the person moving the goods only needs to present one single goods movement reference at the frontier. It will also allow linking of the movement of goods to declarations, and this enables automatic arrival in HMRC systems so that declarations can be processed en route. It will allow automation of the Office of Transit function, marking the entry of goods into GB customs territory. And it also allows the notification of risk and outcomes, i.e. whether things are cleared or uncleared in HMRC systems. And if I can have the next slide, please. So this next slide goes into a bit more detail on how GVMS is used for transit movements, whether that's goods being moved into GB from the EU or goods being exported and moved from GB into the EU. Remember, at the moment, and since January this year, it is only those Common Transit Convention movements that can be submitted using the pre-lodgement GVMS model. The other types of import declarations will be introduced via staged customs controls on the 1st of January 2022. Export declarations also can't be pre-lodged via GVMS until the 1st of January 2022. The Border Operating Model is a comprehensive document that covers exports, staged controls and much more. So it's well worth accessing that for more information at gov.uk. And if I could have the next slide, please. So how do you use GVMS? Well, both UK and EU hauliers will need to register for this service, and to do so you'll need a government gateway account, a GB URI, which I must stress is free to apply for, and you can apply even if you are based in the EU. You can register for GVMS now. There's no need to wait till January to register, but you will need to wait until January to use it. And as you can see, if you're moving goods between the EU and GB, the trader, haulier and carrier will also need to ensure that they have access to all of the right systems to ensure that the goods can move. And if I could have the next slide up on screen, please. Now, we have a very informative diagram that demonstrates the journey of a GVMS import from the EU into GB. There are certain actions that must be carried out before the goods move, before they arrive at the EU place of exit, once they've arrived at the EU place of exit, and then after they leave the EU and make crossing. For example, the trader must make their declaration onto the chief system to obtain an MRN to provide to their haulier. After the goods have left the EU, you'll notice that there's two potential outcomes from GVMS, which we've illustrated in red and green on this diagram. The system will either identify that checks are needed and communicate a hold message, and that's the part you can see in red. In these cases, the goods should proceed to an HM government facility where risking will be completed and HMRC system will be updated by a government official before the goods can be considered cleared. The other outcome is that GVMS will be satisfied that no failures have occurred and there's no need for further checks. In these circumstances, the goods are cleared and the vehicle is free to proceed. If I could have the next slide, please. With any process, there's a risk that mistakes can be made, so we've picked out some of the most common errors for goods arriving into the UK under transit. So just a few things to be careful of. Firstly, hauliers not ending movements at office of destination or authorised consignee locations could be a common error. And another error is hauliers not completing an office of transit on entry into GB. And if I could have the next slide, please, I'll go over a couple more errors. Continuing with these common errors, it's also very important that a transit movement is not closed on the system before the goods leave the EU, because if this happens, the goods aren't moving under a valid transit movement, so they risk being stopped at the border. And another error is discrepancies on paperwork, like inconsistencies between goods, transit declarations and import documents. And if I could have the next slide, please. And finally, two other errors that we've seen occur are declaring the wrong office of departure and declaring the wrong office of transit for entry into the EU or other CTC territory. I will now touch on GB import VAT, if I can have the next slide, please. So firstly, I wanted to just flag postponed VAT accounting, which is also known as PVA. This is available to VAT registered businesses for imports of goods from all countries, including the EU, and allows businesses to account for VAT on their VAT return. If UK VAT registered traders are using the delayed declarations that I mentioned earlier, then they must use PVA. If you're not using delayed declarations, then you don't have to. And if you're a non-VAT registered trader, you should pay the VAT at the point of declaration. And if you're a non-established taxable person, you are entitled to use PVA. And if I could have the next slide, please. Reusable packaging requires a declaration, and if you're claiming returned goods relief or temporary admission, you can make this declaration by conduct or orally. At GB locations, you can make a declaration by conduct for reusable packaging by either disembarking from a vessel, driving past a customs office, or loading the goods onto the relevant vehicle. And on export from GB, the declaration by conduct will be by driving across the boundary of a port or driving past a customs office. You can make an oral declaration for reusable packaging by telling a border force officer about it. And further information on this process is available at gov.uk. There are a couple of very handy links on this slide that will direct you to that. If I can have the next slide, please. Now, just a few points on rules of origin. Rules of origin help you to work out where your goods originate from and which goods are covered in trade agreements. Using these rules to establish the country of origin of imported and exported goods will help you to identify goods which may qualify for lower or no customs duty. Please see the links shared on the slide to online guides which give detailed information about the rules of origin requirements under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement and how to classify your goods. And if I could have the next slide, please. And finally, just to summarise on what businesses should be doing now and in the not too distant future to prepare for January 2022. Now, we would expect businesses to agree their Incoterms and who will be responsible for what. They should share that detail within their supply chain so that everyone involved has a clear understanding. We would also say that you should apply for any authorisations that you require now too, so that they're granted in plenty of time for when you're going to need them. For example, this could be authorisations for IT systems, simplified procedures or duty deferment. And one final reminder from me that EXS declarations are now required. From January, you will need to submit import declarations for movements into GB from the EU. You'll also be able to use GVMS from January. And from July 2022, safety and security declarations for imports into GB will be required. I really hope this has been helpful. Thank you very much for your time this morning, and I shall now pass back to Margaret. Thank you.
Lindsay, thank you very much. That was helpful, and I can see questions are continuing to come in and your colleague Claire is answering them, but we will pick a lot of these up again in the Q&A session later. So thank you very much, Lindsay. Next, we're going to go to Anastasia Bernhardt from the Department of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and Anastasia is going to tell us all about exporting food and drink from the EU to GB. Thank you, Anastasia.
Fantastic. Thank you, Margaret, and good morning, everyone. So my name is Anastasia Bernhardt, and I work for the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs in the UK. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to be talking you through the new import controls for sanitary and phytosanitary goods entering Great Britain, following the announcement that was made by UK government on the 14th of September. Now, as Margaret has previously mentioned, these slides will be shared with you after today's event, and my colleagues will also be joining us for the Q&A later in the presentation. So if you do have any questions about this presentation, please put them in the chat and we will try our best to answer them for you today. If we could move 2 slides on, please. Fantastic, thank you. So now there were some changes that have already come into force, and they came into force in January earlier this year. And these apply to certain goods such as products of animal origin under safeguard measures, live animals, and high priority plants and plant products. Now there are links to further guidance on this page if you do need a refresher on what those controls entail. If we can move on to the next slide, please, where I'm going to give you a brief overview of the future upcoming import controls, which will come into force next year. Now, before talking in more detail about IT systems, health certification, and marketing standards for you. So from 1st of January, products of animal origin, animal byproducts, and high-risk food not of animal origin will need to be pre-notified. Pre-notification for all regulated plants and plant products will also be required. Now, this notification should be made by your importer in Great Britain using the Import of Animals Food and Feed System, otherwise known as IPAFS, which is the new IT system for notifying the authorities in Great Britain of the arrival of SPS goods. Then, from 1st of July next year, there will be new requirements for export health certificates for products of animal origin and animal byproducts, and you will need a phytosanitary certificate for plants and plant products. Sanitary and phytosanitary goods will also need to enter Great Britain through the appropriate border control posts to enable physical and identity checks. So that gives you a brief overview of what is coming up. But if we move on to the next slide, I will tell you about January in a bit more detail, which is when the requirement to pre-notify sanitary and phytosanitary goods comes in. Now, this is something you need to do using the IT system IPAFS. It's the responsibility of your importer in Great Britain to submit that pre-notification, but to just give you a flavour of the sort of information they need to make that notification, this includes things like the product being imported, the date that the product will be imported into Great Britain, which country the imported product is coming from, and the place of destination for the consignment. So to access IPAFs, the importer will need to create a government gateway ID using the UK government website gov.uk. The first person to register an organisation will become the administrative owner. Now, in order to raise a notification, you'll need to have a UK-based entity that can be detailed on the application and is responsible for the consignment. You may need to employ an import agent to do so. Any notification raised on IPAFs must be raised by the person responsible for the consignment. Now on to the next slide. So this is just, again, a quick overview of everything that comes in from 1st of July. So again, that is products of animal origin and animal byproducts need the relevant export health certificate. The requirement for phytosanitary certificates is extended to include all regulated plants and plant products, and they will also be subject to physical and identity checks at border control posts. So the physical and identity checks for high priority plants and plant products, so those are plants that have already been required to be pre-notified and include health certificates since earlier this year. The checks for those will move from places of destination to border control posts in July next year. And again, all sanitary and phytosanitary goods need to enter Great Britain using the appropriate border control post from the 1st of July next year. There's one exception to that, and that is the physical checks of live animals, which will continue at place of destination until you are otherwise notified. On to the next slide. And here I will talk to you about export health certificates in more detail. Now, it is the EU exporter's responsibility to obtain the export health certificate, which will be issued to you by the competent authority in the country from which you are exporting from. So a certifying officer must be authorised by the competent authority to complete the official certificate. They could be an official vet or an official inspector as defined by the relevant EU retained legislation. Now, you must send an electronic copy of that health certificate to your importer in Great Britain and ensure that a physical copy of the original certified health certificate travels with the consignment. Your importer in Great Britain will upload the electronic copy you send them onto IPAFs as part of the pre-notification process from July. Now, any official sanitary and phytosanitary documents that are required to accompany the health certificate will be specified on the relevant health certificate. And you should also know that other documentation may be required depending on the commodity you are trading in. So to give you an example, that would be a catch certificate for marine caught fish. Now, there are some model health certificates available on gov.uk, and you can use these to check the specific requirements for your commodity, but I must stress that these are examples of certificates, and these are not the real certificates because those will be issued to you by the relevant competent authority in the country you're exporting from. Now, there are links to further guidance about how these certificates are filled out at the bottom of this slide, and a link to those model health certificates as well. And as we'll be sharing the slides with you after today's event, you should be able to access these. Now, if you cannot identify an appropriate health certificate, you should speak with your importer in Great Britain and check gov.uk for an import licence. If there is no import licence available, you will need to complete an IV58 form and send it to the Animal and Plant Health Agency. And again, we can share links available on the slide and the email address you need to send those to. On to the next slide. So we get a lot of questions from businesses about composite products. So first of all, I will clarify for you what I mean by a composite product. So these are food products that are intended for human consumption only. They're a mix of processed animal products of animal origin and plant products, and that must be the main ingredient, so not just added for flavouring or processing. And that processed element is key to it being a composite product. Just to give you a few examples, things that would be a composite product would be a ready meal lasagna, pork pies, or mayonnaise if it contains more than 50% egg. Now, composite products will follow the staged requirements for products of animal origin, so that's pre-notification from 1st of January and health certification from 1st of July, and also in July to arrive at an appropriate border control post. However, there are a few exemptions. So goods are exempt if they contain less than 50% processed animal product, they contain no meat product, and they also meet the requirements set out in the legislation that is outlined on this slide. Now, if your goods contain any meat product, or if they have more than 50% animal product, it must be pre-notified using IPAFs, it must be accompanied by an export health certificate, and follow that phased approach for products of animal origin. So on to the next slide, which gives you a bit more information about phytosanitary certificates. So those are the certificates required for all regulated plants and plant products from July next year. So this is a statement from the Plant Health Authority that the consignment has been officially inspected, that it complies with legal requirements for entry into Great Britain, and it's also free from quarantine pests and diseases. Now, this needs to be obtained from the Plant Health Authority where the supplier is based, and the inspection of that certificate must take place no more than 15 days before the consignment is dispatched, and someone in the inspecting Plant Health Authority must sign the phytosanitary certificate within that same 14-day period. Now, you will need to upload a copy of the phytosanitary certificate onto the import IT system Peach in order to pre-notify. And on to the next slide, please. Now, when I was talking to you about the 1st of January requirements, I talked you through what was needed for the pre-notification on IPAFs for sanitary and phytosanitary products. There's a slightly different process from July for pre-notifying these products. Again, this is something for your importer based in Great Britain to do. But the process for pre-notifying changes, it's still on IPAFs, but the process used is a Common Health Entry Document, otherwise known as a CHED. And I've outlined for you on this slide what that includes. So it's which country the imported product is coming from, what is the product that's being imported, why it's being imported, and when it's going to arrive in Great Britain, transport details, and which BCP it's arriving and at what time, any supporting documents such as the health certificate, and approved establishment details for products of animal origin. Also at the bottom of this slide, which I appreciate is probably quite small for you to see today, but when you receive it later, this is the process map for how that pre-notification happens from 1st of July, just to make the process a bit clearer for you. Now, I promise I'm nearly done. If I move on to the next slide, I've just got a bit more detail about marketing standards. Now, these are different depending on what product you are trading in. So I've provided a link that gives you the full details, but just to pull out some of those key points from 1st of July, you need to know changes for hops, for wine, and for poultry meat. So for hops, from 1st of July, all hop imports from third countries, so that's both EU and non-EU countries, will require a GB attestation of equivalence issued by an authorised agency from the country of origin. Up until that point, you can continue to use an EU attestation of equivalence. And up until that point, you will need an EU certificate from EU member states only, issued by an approved certification centre. For wine from 1st of July, that will be when wine products will need a UK VI1 certificate to enter Great Britain. And then also from 1st of July, EU poultry meat with optional indications for farming or chilling methods will need a third country listing or an EU competent authority certificate. And onto my final slide. Also from 1st of July, you need to remember if you're trading in organic goods, from 1st of July, those goods will need a certificate of inspection, which you'll need to use the manual GB organic import system to obtain. And then for food labelling, you have a little bit longer to make the necessary changes. So for any pre-packaged food placed on the UK market after the 31st of September 2022, a UK-based food business operator or UK importer address on the food will be required. Labelling rules apply once the food is placed on the market rather than when it's imported. Therefore, food information may be corrected following import, but before the food is placed on the market in the UK. Overstickering is an acceptable method of correcting information, but an oversticker must not obscure or cover any mandatory information, for example, the date mark or the lot mark. On to the final slide, which just touches on groupage. By this, I mean the commercial grouping of multiple consignments within a single sealed trailer or container. Now, there are 4 models that have been developed for importing groupage loads from the European Union into Great Britain. These are the consolidation hub method, the sequential or single model, also the linear or multiple pallet. Now, we will be issuing guidance that reflects the new 14th of September announcement shortly, and we can share it with the attendees once that is available. And there should be all sorts of useful documents that talk through these models in more detail than I am able to today. So I think I will leave it there for now and pass back over to you, Margaret. Just to say there are further links at the end of the slide if anyone is looking for further guidance. Thanks so much for your attention.
Thank you, Anastasia. And a few questions coming in, but I can see your colleagues are answering some of those, and we'll pick them up again in the session later. And as I said earlier, we will be sharing the slides, so you will have access to these links. Next, we're going to go to our colleague in BPDG, John Winterbourne. John is going to talk us through what happens when goods arrive through the short straits into Kent. What are the facilities there? John, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Good morning, everybody. So as Margaret mentioned, my name is John. I work within the Contingency and Locations team in UK Border and Protocol Delivery Group. If we look at the next slide, please. So within Kent itself, there are several at the moment inland border facilities in Kent. So there is Ebbsfleet, Dover Whitecliffs, which is a site in Port of Dover area, Dover Western Docks, Stop 24 and Sevington. So today I'm going to focus mainly on Sevington, but that map there gives you an idea of the other sites that are within Kent. Next slide, please. Thank you. So within the UK, there are other sites which are based outside of Kent. So Warrington, Holyhead, Birmingham and North Weald as well. Next slide, please. So as I said earlier, the focus I'm going to give today is on the site in Sevington. From January 2022, all short straits traffic requiring checks will be directed to Sevington. So they are if they come in through Eurotunnel or through the Port of Dover. After full inbound checks come into effect in July 2022, traffic will continue to go to Sevington. And as the Dover sites go live, these will be available as well. So the sort of checks that are going to be completed at Sevington include CITES, so the Convention of International Trade of Endangered Species, ATA, TIR carnets, so the temporary exports to EU, Office of Departure and Office of Transit compliance checks, as well as border readiness checks as well. At Sevington, stays at the site are limited to 2 hours. And an IBF app is available for drivers with smartphones to help them get processed on site as quick as possible. You can also use the service to tell HMRC in advance that you're attending the inland border facility or the IBF, because the goods that you're moving are either going to be an office of departure or office destination, are covered by an ATA carnet, or need a CITES permit. Next slide, please. So the departments are going to be based at Sevington. Currently on site, there are HMRC and Border Force. And then in January 2022, they'll be joined by DEFRA and DVSA, as well as Port Health authorities. The capacity at Sevington at the moment is 1,095 total spaces. That's spread over 550 holding spaces, 300 contingency freight management spaces, and 245 spaces in swim lanes. The actual number might not be realised because of the fact that the site is evolving with changing requirements of the different departments there. If for some reason Sevington needs to be closed down, there is contingency in place. So the drivers will be advised of the closure of Sevington, and then they'll be redirected to another available site, which, as you saw before, would include North Weald, Ebbsfleet, Warrington or Birmingham. Next slide, please. So future Kent sites, so as I mentioned before, Dover Whitecliffs, a further HMRC site is being developed at Dover Whitecliffs, with the aim of coming online for the end of 2022. So this site will act as a location for inbound and outbound transit of goods to and from the UK, and provide a facility for where custom check can be implemented 24/7, 365 days per year. At this moment, an additional DEFRA site is being developed, but for the POAO checks. Further details aren't currently available at this stage, as it's still at a commercially sensitive stage. And an additional DEFRA site is being considered for small animal checks. This is again in the early stages, and more information will be provided closer to completion. So that's the end of the presentation on the inland border facilities. So I'll hand back to Margaret again, please.
Thank you very much, John. And just so all are aware, of course, we are fully aware that there are other routes into GB, and we are doing a series of these events across the EU, but focusing on key routes for the different countries. But we will be able to share information about facilities related to other ports with you in the weeks and months to come, or indeed by all means get in touch with us if you have any questions. Thank you very much, John. And now I think we're moving on to our next presentation from Charlotte. Charlotte Dicken works for the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and Charlotte is going to talk us through UKCA markings. Hello, Charlotte.
Thanks very much, Margaret, and good morning, everyone. So as Margaret said, I work for the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and I head up our international engagement on the UK's new domestic regime for goods. So our team's responsible for the implementation of the regime, and this includes supporting businesses as they have to implement the new requirements. So I'm going to run through the key timeframes in the presentation, but please do add in any questions into the chat and we'll do our best to answer these at the end of the session. Next slide, please. So here are the key timeframes for the implementation of the UKCA marking. So the UKCA marking was introduced at the beginning of this year, and businesses can start using it to place their goods on the GB market. So in August this year, the government extended the recognition of the CE marking for an additional 12 months. This means that businesses can continue to place CE marked goods on the Great Britain market until the 31st of December 2022. And then from the 1st of January 2023, you will need to start using the UKCA marking to place your goods on the market. There are different arrangements for medical devices, as it states on this slide. So the UKCA marking will be required from the 1st of July 2023 for medical devices. We've also extended the marking easement, which allows the UKCA marking to be included on a sticky label or on an accompanying document until the 31st of December 2023. So you have an additional year. So from the 1st of January 2024, this will need to be affixed directly to the product itself if required by legislation. Next slide, please. So all products that previously required the CE marking, including aerosol products, will require the UKCA marking. The technical requirements for applying the UKCA marking are currently exactly the same as applying the C marking, and so there's been no change. Businesses will need to use a UK approved body rather than an EU notified body if they require third-party testing to place their product on the GB market. And you can find a list of the UK approved bodies on the UK MCAB database, which can be found on gov.uk. So additionally, importers have duties to ensure products are compliant with product standards, and these duties include things such as labelling goods with importer details, so name and address. And until the 31st of December 2022, these details can be on an accompanying document rather than on the good itself. Importers also have to keep a copy of the Declaration of Conformity and ensure the relevant technical documentation can be made available to enforcement authorities upon request. So there are different requirements for placing goods on the Northern Ireland market. So due to the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is now in force, for as long as it applies, goods placed on the market in Northern Ireland will need to meet relevant EU rules. So you can continue to use the C marking if you either undertake self-assessment or use an EU notified body for third-party conformity assessment if required. You can also use a UK approved body for third-party conformity assessment. However, your product will still be tested against EU rules, and you'll need to use both the UK NI and the C marking. So I think this brings me to the end of the slides. Thank you very much for listening. Like I said, please do put any questions in the chat. I appreciate it was quite a brief overview. So do let us know if you've got any questions on any of this, and I'll hand back to Margaret.
Thank you, Charlotte. And thank you to all of our presenters this morning. I hope, moving on to the next slides, we've got some case studies that we prepared for you, which bring together a number of the procedures that we've talked about. We have 4 case studies. They are quite detailed, and I'm not going to go through them all with you, but we will share the slides, as I said. We've designed these to bring out the GB import controls. All 4 case studies involve moving goods from the EU into GB. The first one is moving auto parts into the GB from the EU through the short straits from the 1st of January 2022. As you will have spotted from our presentations, requirements will change from the 1st of July 2022 in that additional detail will be required in the form of an entry summary declaration. So in this particular case study, on the next slide, we have outlined the systems in the UK that the supply chain will come up against, if you like. The systems that the importer and the haulage company will need to interact with when moving goods into GB from the 1st of January. So in this example, of course, we're reminding everybody that they will need EORI numbers. You will need an EU EORI number to interact with EU systems and a GB EORI number to interact with systems in GB, in Great Britain. So Damien will need is the EU exporter in this example. He's exporting auto parts to GB. We've chosen a date on the 23rd of January 2022. So Claire is the UK importer, and we have a haulage company who are moving the goods. We have kept this case study quite simple, and we're trying to just bring out the detail, as I said. So Claire is the importer, and she will need to make the import declaration. Of course, she can hire an intermediary to do that for her, but as I said, we're keeping it simple today. So if she's doing an import declaration, she will need to have access to the UK's chief system, the customs handling of import and export of freight. She will apply for that using her EORI number, and there's a form available to apply for that. She will need to have information such as her EORI number, and she will also need to sign up with a custom system provider to use the chief system. She will need to, as I said, have this software to be able to link up and do that import declaration. The haulage company will need to have an EU and a GB EORI number to interact with the systems on both sides of the border, and they will need to register for the UK's Goods Vehicle Movement Service if they're moving goods into a port that adopts the pre-lodgement model, and in this case at the Short Straits that will be required. So they can sign up to that Goods Vehicle Movement Service here. If they're an EU-based haulage company, they can still sign up, and they should sign up for the GVMS service. To do so, they'll need a GB EORI number, and they'll need to set up a government gateway account. You can do that even if you're based in the EU, and you'll have your passport, and that'll give you a user ID and allow you to register for the GVMS service. On the next slide, please. We've got a step-by-step approach to the movement of this. I do apologise for these slides. They're quite busy and detailed. We will share the slides with you so you can study them at your leisure, but I won't read it out to you, but I'll just highlight a couple of the key points. So obviously, the first thing to remind ourselves is, and something we're hearing about, is that everybody in the supply chain needs to have agreed the terms and conditions and to fully understand who is responsible for what element. So Damien and Claire in this case will need to have agreed their Incoterms and understand who is responsible for the particular border procedures and formalities. As we know, Damien will be submitting an export declaration, and Germany in this case will be the country of export, and in this example France would be the country of exit. After he submits the declaration, the German customs system will of course produce an export accompanying document. This movement will be coming into a GB port, as I said, that adopts the pre-lodgement model. So Claire must pre-lodge her import declaration to move the goods into GB before the haulage firm moves the goods. So she submits that into Chief, and this produces a movement reference number, which she must give to the haulage firm. And as I said, the haulage firm will need to have registered and be able to use the Goods Vehicle Movement Service, and they will import to record that import documentation. The haulage firm goes into the GVMS system and creates a Goods Movement Reference Number, and they will link the movement reference number for the import declaration. They'll record the vehicle details and the intended crossing details in the GVMS system, as Lindsay outlined. They can group a number of MRNs together on that goods movement reference if they're carrying more than one load in the truck. So the GMR then will prove that the necessary declaration has been made, as the MRNs are only generated, of course, once the declaration has been pre-lodged. So the haulage firm needs to provide Joe, the driver, with the movement reference numbers for the export declaration and the goods movement reference number for the GVMS system. And he can proceed then to the tunnel or the port in France and leave. Of course, as now, as you've all been doing export declarations, that will be scanned and the export will be cleared as the goods leave the EU. And of course, at check-in, Joe will also have provided the goods movement reference number. The carrier will check that goods movement reference number to make sure it's valid. You will not be allowed onto the ferry or the train if it's not valid. So that's a new stage that will come in from the 1st of January. As I said, the export will be discharged when the ferry or train leaves the EU. And the GMR then for the import into GB will be checked remotely. And if the goods require inspection, the systems will return a held status. And this message will be communicated through Joe through various means. Some carriers may have screens on the train or the ferry, and alternatively, Joe can check by putting the GMR into a web page as to whether the goods need to be inspected. If they do require inspection, the driver will need to go to the inland border facilities outlined by John earlier as coming through Kent. If not, they can carry on, go straight to Joe's warehouse, and Claire, once she's received the consignment, can now make any updates to Chief that are necessary, and correcting any of the dates, the crossing details, and the declaration must be updated to arrived by the end of the next working day. So that is a very brief outline of the customs procedures for moving goods into GB from the 1st of January. It's a fairly straightforward example, but we hope it outlines to you the steps required. On the next case study, we have imagined the same movement of goods, but that would take place after the 1st of July 2022. So if we move on to the next slides, please. What changes then from the 1st of July is that the haulage company will need to be responsible for submitting a safety and security declaration for the import, an entry summary declaration. And to do this, they will need to be registered to use the safety and security GB service, and they can sign up to do that. Again, they'll need a government gateway account to do this. Again, EU-based haulage companies can do this. And once registered, then they can submit entry summary declarations. And moving on to the next slide. We've highlighted in red on the next slide the boxes where things change from the previous example. So as you can see here at box 6, the operator, as the active means of transport, the haulier, is responsible, as I said, for the entry summary declaration, and they'll need to have submitted that onto the safety and security GB system. When they do that, they will get, as outlined in box 7, they will get a movement reference number from that entry, and that also needs to be added to the goods movement reference number for GVMS. So you're combining the movement reference number for the import declaration, the safety and security declaration, and the vehicle and crossing details into GVMS then from the 1st of July. But other than that, in this fairly straightforward example, the goods stay the same. I will, as I said, we'll share the slides. You can peruse those steps at your leisure. I'm sorry they're not more stylish for you, but we wanted to get the detail out there to help you. As I said, in reality, many along the we have perhaps intermediaries, you might have freight forwarders acting for you to do the whole movement, but these are the basic steps that are required. And the important thing to remind everybody is that everybody must be clear about who is doing what, so that there are no hold-ups at the border. Thank you. We have 2 more case studies, and we have made these a little bit more complex. On the next case study, we're moving some fish fingers from the EU to GB, again, through the short straits from January, and then case study 4 goes on to move these fish fingers from July. So on case study 3, if we could go down to the next slide, thank you. Again, all of the customs declarations will be required. All of those systems will be in place from the 1st of January, the GVMS system. And in addition, of course, Claire, the importer, will need to register for the IPAF system as Anastasia outlined. And she will need to pre-notify the arrival of the fish fingers on the IPAF system. On to the next slide, please. Again, a rather complex case study, but we have tried to bring out here the steps for the customs procedures, and we have added in then the steps for the IPAF's entry. And of course, because we're moving fish fingers, we also have the additional requirement to have catch certificates, or the illegal, unreported and unregulated documentation needs to be in place to certify where the catch comes from. You'll be possibly relieved to hear I wasn't planning to read through this case study. We will share it with you. I appreciate it will have a niche interest. Not everybody will be very interested in this, but we hope it helps you to understand how the different requirements overlay or sit alongside each other. And again, the key point to remember here is understanding who is responsible for what systems they're going to come into touch with, and how they can register for those systems. The basic requirements, the basic requirements for registering for those IT systems. And just as a reminder, as we have an audience in Germany in the main, you can register for GB systems, and you can create a government gateway account, and you can enter your EORI number. Apart from the IPAF system, I should point out that you will need to have an intermediary in the UK to register for the IPAF system, or the GB importer would be able to register for that. Thank you. I think that is the next slide. If we could just go down to the next one, and on the next slide we've added in, as I said, from the 1st of July 2022. All of those requirements are in place, but there are some changes here that we will point out, of course. Food should enter Britain through a border control post, and we will publish details of where all of those are. We'll be building on that detail over the weeks to come and the months to come. And also export health certificates will be required as well. So this rather complex case study here, which goes over 2 slides, 19 is not the last step here, there is a further slide after this, combines all of those requirements, and including the requirement after the 1st of July as well to have an entry summary declaration for the customs procedures. So we'll share that with you. I'm very happy to answer any questions you have, and I know we have our colleagues from DEFRA and other departments here to help with that. Thank you, Kathleen. If we could move on to the next slide. So we've been watching the Q&A session as we've gone through, and I've been gathering up some of the questions and answers as you've sent them in. I will need to catch up a little bit now on those that have come in the last few minutes. But I think, first of all, if we can start with our colleagues from the German Customs Department. For Melanie, are you still with us? We have some questions in that I think many of which have been answered through your presentation, but it might be nice just to focus on those. And the first question I have for Melanie is, what is the equivalent to the customs freight simplified procedures in Germany?
Hi, Margaret. Just to say that our Zoll colleagues might need to unmute again by clicking *6, so we'll leave them a minute to work with the technology there.
Thank you. I can come on to HMRC if that helps, Melanie. I'll give you some more time to unmute. Claire, Lindsay, hello to HMRC. So one of the first questions we had, it goes to both customs departments, but we'll start with you, is how will HMRC and the Zoll others be proceeding with empties? Will there be any simplifying the procedures for moving empties over borders that you're aware of?
Hi Margaret, it's Claire.
Hi Claire.
From HMRC. So we have had a waiver in place, but that is now, as Lindsay outlined in her session there, that has now closed, and declarations are required for empties. However, we do have some really good reusable packaging import-export declaration processes. Lindsay's posted some links in the chat, and it's definitely something that we're keeping an eye on and working with stakeholders on how we can improve that and simplify it even further if possible.
Thank you. Thank you. I think, and a number of these questions you've already answered, but is it EXS required for RoRo only? I think you've said no, but if you could just explain that to the audience, the wider audience. Thank you.
That's correct, Margaret. So it's not RoRo specific, it is required for all routes, but you do need to check first to see if that EXS will be required. A lot of times the safety and security requirements will be covered in your export declaration, and we have provided a link so that you can see how to check that.
Thank you. And then there were some questions about intrastat declarations, and I can see you've answered that, but if you could just outline the position on intrastat, please, for the wider audience in case they missed your answer. Thank you.
This is a good news one. We don't often have good news, something you don't have to do, but that's right. For movements, currently you do have to complete intrastat declarations if you're over the threshold and the goods are moving EU to GB. From the 1st of January 2022, that's no longer a requirement. One less thing to do.
Thank you. Now, where am I? Just one hot in. Will the GVMS system communicate with any EU systems? And the system here is the French system. I'm afraid I know the answer to this, but do tell me.
So of course, ideally, we'd like all of those communications to be in place. And as you know, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement certainly allows for us to talk to member states about doing that. Currently, it doesn't. But as you well know, Margaret, we've got lots of in-depth discussions, and we've been walking our French colleagues through the GVMS system in some detail in recent weeks.
Thank you. Lovely. We look forward to that. And then now let's see the other question that you have answered, but again, useful to bring out. Will simplified procedures be applicable in the UK after the rollout of CDS, that is the replacement of the chief system with the CDS system? Is that, sorry, I'll let you answer that question first and I'll come back with the follow-up one.
I'll come in there. So yes, the simple answer is that simplified frontier declarations and simplified processes are compatible with CDS. I think the question that was raised was the fact that CDS has more data requirements.
Yes.
So that is correct, but we are continuing to work really closely with software providers and industry stakeholders about what else we can do with CDS as that migration comes closer.
Lovely, thank you. You answered my follow-up question perfectly, thank you. There was a question about the UK providing confirmation of exit. Is that possible? And I think one of the answer you put in the chat was that a departure will be assumed after 5 days on the chief system. Is that correct, or is it...
That's correct? There's a default process that chief will assume the departure. It's 5 days through Dover and Eurotunnel. It's 15 days in some other route locations, but that is the case. I think this is again probably one around how integrated are the UK and EU member state systems, and again, as we've covered, Margaret, those are ongoing discussions covered by the Trade and Cooperation Agreement.
Thank you, Claire. And the another rather complex question, I think, is about reusable packaging. So there was an example given that reusable packaging can remain in the UK for many months and it can go back out. So what documents are required, and does it need to be declared on both sides, even if it stays in the UK or Germany for many months?
So I think my colleague Lindsay is going to take that one away and just look at it in a little bit more detail. But as we said before, particularly for empties for reusable packaging, we're very keen to streamline this as much as possible. I do know that one of the key criteria is as long as the reusable packaging is very clearly labelled and can be traced in origin to the owner. So I think there was a question around the German company in this case. So as long, I think most of the reusable packaging is very clearly marked. So we will take that one away though around the timings, because I don't think that's one we've been asked before, which just goes to show the value of these events.
Yeah, indeed. So it was interesting to have a new and more detailed question. And in relation, a related question is, are pallets reusable packaging, wooden pallets?
Yeah, so again, Lindsay has answered that in the chat, and as long as they meet the criteria, they can be reusable packaging. But just to note, there are additional requirements on reusable packaging related to DEFRA's side of the house rather than HMRC's. So, and I think Lindsay's posted some information in the chat, including a link on packaging itself.
Perfect, thank you. And we have a little follow-up question in on chief and assuming exit after 5 days. Does an option on chief need to be ticked when you're doing that, or will it happen automatically?
It's an automatic default.
Perfect, okay, thank you. One of the other questions that came up, and I think what I'm interpreting this question to relate to the treatment of imports at temporary storage ports rather than pre-lodgement ports, and is basically, I suppose, it's a question about is HMRC thinking about the fact that at temporary storage ports, the requirements for lodging import declarations almost remove the benefit of being an authorised consignor or a consignee, in that they're not able to use the GVMS system. I know that's something that HMRC are thinking about and looking at. Is there anything more you can say on that?
Yes, so Margaret, I think my colleague James has answered this one in the chat, and we are looking into this. I mean, just to say, you know, the benefits of being an authorised consignee or consignor are definitely still there, including the fact that you can now add on additional locations and we'll turn around those requests within 5 days, which is certainly a recognition of the fact that the authorised consignee status is something worth having. But yeah, we are looking at the temporary storage facility issue.
Thank you. Thank you. And another question before I come to Melanie. Was the question about whether EU EORI numbers would ever be needed for UK systems. I think I'm correct in saying they would not be needed for UK systems. Is that right? If I've understood the question correctly.
Margaret. Yeah, you are correct. So that's right. EU EORIs will not work in the GB custom systems. That's why you need to get a GB EORI. And as Lindsay covered in her presentation, it's really simple. It is also free, and you can do it online with HMRC to get a GB EORI, and any EU trader can apply for a GB EORI.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you very much, Claire. Don't run off just in case, as we move over to Melanie, in case there's other issues you may want to discuss together or anything else you might want to bring out. Melanie, if your system is letting you talk to us, are you there?
I hope so. I hope so.
Yes, great. I can hear you loud and clear. Thank you. And thank you for bearing with us. One day perhaps we can do these face to face. Wouldn't it be lovely? Yes. So the first question we had was about the equivalent to the customs freight simplified procedures in the UK. Could you talk us through a little bit about the simplified procedures available in Germany, please?
The simplified procedures available in Germany and import or export. As I wasn't able to read the questions. Yes, I know internet during this.
Yes,
I'm really sorry.
No, sorry. No, that's fine. I think it relates to import. I'll work on the basis that it relates to import, but I know the questioner can correct me on the chat if need be.
Okay, we have simplifications on imports, but I think it would go too large to face them all out right now, because normally you have to ask on your local customs authority to get simplifications. There is a whole procedure behind it, so it might be more helpful than really to go to the IHK or to the local customs authority to discuss this question in detail.
Yes,
because
yes.
Of course you can have the authorization to not having to pass by the local custom office at every time, but there's a whole procedure behind it, and I think it would really go too far to answer this in detail right now. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, that's fine. Thank you. I think if it's like the UK system, you'll need to meet certain requirements. Okay, well, thank you. But there is a system there, and there's a way through to apply for it. Okay.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Another question that came up, and it might be a little unfair to ask this of you, but the questioner wants to import goods from Turkey to Portugal, and they would like to do their import at the first point of entry in the EU, which they describe as being Bulgaria. So can they do that and then deliver the goods to Portugal? I think my understanding is once goods are imported into the EU, they have free movement within it.
Yes,
but is there any health warnings you'd like to put on that?
Either they do the full customs declaration in Bulgaria, and then we have the free movement of goods, which is simply the whole impact of the European Union, or they put under regime of transit in Bulgaria and then can be moved to Portugal. So that's up to the choice to the company importing the goods. But normally, once the whole clearance is done in Bulgaria, goods afterwards are EU goods and can move freely through the whole territory.
Perfect, thank you. I think people were welcoming your presentation, and some wanted maybe a summary of some of the named articles, but I think these would be available on the EU Europa website. Is that correct?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. The whole legal basis as it's communicated on those websites. Yes.
Lovely, thank you. One of the other hot topics was about that exit notification systems and that work that you talked about doing with France to make sure that that works well. So I think we've covered that, but by all means, if the audience think we haven't put something in the chat, and I'll try to pick that up with you. So there was a question, a rather technical one, and you may want to take it away, but there was a question about a UK customer who wants to buy goods in Germany, but wants the German company to send those goods to Sweden. And I think it's the German company asking us how they could handle that correctly. Can they just move the goods from Germany to Sweden, or would they need to, because there's a UK business involved, do they need to do any declarations?
May I take this question just with me to discuss this with the experts, because special questions like this, it's always a bit delicate just to answer them on the running like this. So
yes,
sorry,
I understand. No, that's fine.
Thank you very much.
And another one that looks quite technical, but we can see what we can do. If we can't do it here today, we can take it away. But it's about goods that are moving from GB into Germany for repair. The example given was wheel sets. What value needs to be declared when you're exporting those again from Germany back to GB?
This is really a very technical question, and I know that we discussed it already on a meeting with associations here in Germany, and I would like to take it away with me as well and to answer properly, because reparations is really a special region.
Lovely. Okay, thank you.
Questions. Yes.
We'll gather those. Thank you. And I think, yes, there's a bit of a question about a UK importer confirming, is it possible, and again, this is something you might want to take away and think about, it might be work that they're doing, but they've talked about it would be very useful if a UK importer could confirm multiple shipments have arrived in the UK by grouping together MRNs. I think this was to satisfy the export declaration side of things, but we'll share that question with you, and when your internet and systems are working, we'll be able to provide a fuller answer. I think that probably covers it for a lot of the customs questions that I've seen, but as I go through some questions for our colleagues in DEFRA, I will keep an eye on the chat and try to pick up any before we finish up the event. But Anastasia, thank you very much, Melanie, and I'm sorry the system didn't work quite so well for you today, but we'll get those questions out to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. Anastasia, hello.
Hello, Margaret.
Hello. Right, I know your colleagues have been picking up lots of these, but let's bring them out a little bit for the audience who might not have been tracking that. There was a question about hay being imported to the UK. It's unclear about the position on hay because it's classified as an import prohibition. I was looking through my old records, and I did see we had a question at an event previously about hay being imported to the EU. We have an answer for that, but can you help us with hay coming into GB?
Thanks, Margaret. So I think there are a few things at play with this question. There's sort of the phytosanitary requirements for importing hay into the UK. There's also some animal health stuff, which unfortunately I don't think I have anyone from our animal health team on the line today, so we will take that one away and come back to you with a bit more detail. And again, I'll have to do the same on the UK global tariff front as well. But I'm wondering whether my colleague Jason Pollock, who is our plants expert, has anything he wants to say on the phytosanitary requirements for hay.
Absolutely, can do, Anastasia. So yes, in relation to the sort of the phytosanitary requirements, there's no need for a phytosanitary certificate or the need for sort of pre-notification on that front. But as Anastasia had mentioned, there are obviously animal health requirements. I mean, I think it's particularly in relation to sort of foot and mouth disease and that it can be potentially carried on hay. So what we'll do is we'll come back to you, as Anastasia has mentioned, in writing, sort of laying out sort of what the requirements are in relation to sort of hay coming into GB. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you. There were a number of questions about samples. There were lab samples. Are they exempted from the SPS requirements? And I think the answer was that not if they're going to be taste tested, but there was some follow-up questions about products of animal origin being brought in for research and testing, not consumption. And I think the general feeling was that this is quite a complex area. Is there somewhere you can point people for some very clear guidance?
Thanks, Margaret. Now I can see that my colleague Arian has been busy answering the detail for this in the Q&A chat. Arian, I don't know if you can answer in a bit more detail some of the points you've drawn out in the Q&A.
I first need to make sure that you can hear me.
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. Sorry, which particular points?
So I think the question was around for samples of products of animal origin or animal byproducts, are there requirements if they're for testing? Do they still need to have the export health certification and pre-notification?
There's a clear rule that if that testing involves human consumption, then it remains a POAO. If the sample or product is definitely not going to be consumed, then it may be traded under the animal byproduct rules, and there is a license or a specific certificate depending on the particular circumstances. And I pasted the link in the chat for further information because it's not my specialist area.
Fantastic, thanks, Arian.
Thank you both. And another question that we've had in is about export health certificates. They are, I think we all know they're complex, but they do require the vehicle registration number and seal numbers to be input. Does that have to be done before the goods leave, or can that be updated at a later stage? Does it have to be done when the goods are being signed off by the vet, say, at the premises in the EU?
Yeah.
Thanks. Oh, Arian, I will leave you to take that one, as I'm sure you are much more knowledgeable on that subject than I am.
Yeah, this is no different than trade in both directions, EU, GB, GB, EU. There's a particular requirement of part 1 of the health certificate, and it is something that the certifying officer must check and enter on the certificate and signs and stamps for. However, in recognition that the means of transport may change after certification, it's permitted for the import declaration, the importer or the agent, to inform the BCP after the certificate has been issued of any changes. You can do that either via part 1 of the CHET declaration in IPAFs, or you can do that by directly communicating with the BCP. The BCP will then accept that you don't need a new export health certificate.
Okay, that's good news. Thank you. Thank you. Just conscious, and correct me if I'm wrong, Anastasia, but these requirements are coming in from the 1st of July. So we will be back around and we'll be available over the months to come to support EU exporters in getting their goods that we all love to eat into GB.
Absolutely. Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you. Unless there's anything else you and your colleagues would like to pick up, I was going to move over to Charlotte. We have a question about UKCA for automotive. Charlotte, are you still with us?
Yeah, I am, Margaret. I just haven't question, I'm afraid.
So there was a question about the requirement for UKCA markings for automotive products. A series of automotive products were listed, seat belts, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Is the UKCA marking required for those, please?
So it will depend what product on the car, but things like, for example, airbags, I think, fall under pyrotechnics regulation and therefore will require the UKCA. So it's dependent on the product legislation. But a list of product legislation is included on gov.uk where you can check whether it applies to the individual product for the car. And I can pop a link in the chat.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you very much. And Claire, if you're still with us, I see we have one late question about moving goods off a site in GB. Somebody's exporting goods to the EU from a manufacturing site in the UK. From the 1st of January, will the site need to be registered as a consignor, or can the truck leave the site before the export declaration has been made and get it whilst driving to the port?
Hi, Margaret, I am still here. So I think this looks to be a question around moving goods under transit. So if you want to move goods under transit, you can apply to be the authorised consignor. That means you can start the declaration process from your site rather than having to do declarations at the point of departure. And you can also use some of the inland facilities as well to do some of that. But we're going to take that one away and give you a more full response after the event, and we'll come back to Peter.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all of you for your questions and for your engagement in our event this morning. We hope you found it useful. As I said, the customs requirements come in from the 1st of January. We are here to support you, and on the next slide we've got some links to some useful material published in GB. The border operating model was published some months ago. We will update it with the new date requirements, so that is a useful source for you. There's a haulier handbook that sets out in practical detail what's required to get through the borders. We are doing more events. You've signed up for this one, so there are other events with other countries that you're welcome to join. And please do send any particular inquiries you've got to our website, or our email address, I should say, at bpdginquiries@Cabinet Office. That will come through to our team, and we will be able to share any answers to questions we haven't covered today. We will publish the slides, and we will pull together some frequently asked questions. But I know we've had some technical questions from you today, so please do send them through to us again if you're not getting answers to those. Thank you very much. On the next slide, we've got one final question for you. We pull these events together, and I'm very grateful for the support from our colleagues in the embassy in Berlin, to all of the officials in the UK, and delighted to have had the German officials join us today. I hope you found that useful and interesting. But we know you've got lots of questions still, so please tell us if you understand more about moving your goods in, and if not, what would you have liked to have seen at this event? And we will try to do better next time if we haven't met all of your expectations. But thank you very much to all of you and to my colleagues in the UK and Germany for joining us this morning, and we hope you found it useful, and I hope the rest of your day goes well and is IT trouble-free. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Margaret, to you and all your colleagues from us in Germany. Much appreciated.
Pleasure, Rafe, as always.
Bye-bye now.